As I believe everybody here knows, my name is Stephen Salel. I am the Robert F. Lange Foundation Curator of Japanese Art here at the Honolulu Museum of Art. Beginning this year, we have embarked upon a multi-year project that focuses on contemporary Japanese manga, that is, graphic novels, and the art historical importance of those works. It's a kind of artwork that not many art museums in the United States have shown. And by not many, I mean almost none. But as part of our museum's new mission to focus on contemporary works, particularly contemporary Asian works that are meaningful to our audience, we've decided to explore artists and writers who take the medium very seriously and show it as fine art. In the process of putting together exhibitions like the one we have on display right now, Visions of Gothic Angels, Japanese manga by Takeya Mio, I've been consulting with a number of manga specialists, both here in Hawaii and in Japan and on the U.S. mainland. I was first introduced to Deb Aoki about a year and a half ago, and I knew about her work as both a visual artist and as a promoter of international manga. But over the past 2 years, as I've learned more about her, I have to say that my respect for her has deepened immensely. I was wondering about how to introduce her this afternoon to you all, and so I went to various sources to find a little blurb about her. And so, for example, in her book, her collected comics bento box, which, by the way, she has brought copies of this afternoon, and she's interested in offering them to you all as gifts at the end of the talk. So please don't run away when we finish talking. When you look at the back of that book, it says that Deb was born and raised in Honolulu, Hawaii. She grew up on a steady diet of Japanese comic books, MTV, and Spam musubi. She has published her comic strips and illustrations in such newspapers and magazines as the Honolulu Advertiser, the Honolulu Weekly, Deep Magazine, Honolulu Magazine, the Kaleo o Hawaii, and various other forums. But then if you look at Deb's website, she has transformed herself completely, and nowadays it talks about the work that she is doing drawing storyboards for software companies such as eBay, Citrix, Purple Incorporated. She has worked with Google, Design Thinking, SF Meetups, and various other organizations in Northern California. Of course, She is famous recently for her work with About.com and the 6 years in which she developed their content about manga. She is also the founder of the website mangacomicsmanga.com. And if you have an opportunity to see some of those websites and appreciate how seriously she takes the current evolution of the manga industry, I think you will agree with me that she is quite an incredible authority on the subject of manga. It's a great delight for me to invite her back home here to talk about her career. Please welcome Deb Aoki.
Thank you, Stephen. Oh, that was such a nice intro. And thank you for coming out on a Friday at 4 o'clock. I know that's not easy, given the traffic I've seen out there. So thank you so much. It's nice to see a lot of familiar faces, too. All right, this part might not be necessary, but this is the little intro. I do UX, nowadays I do UX design, content strategy. I write about comics, a big old manga nerd. I'm going to tell you a little love story about me and manga. Since I was a little girl, I always read comics. I mean, as soon as I started reading comics. But a lot of it was, the American kind. I would read like Little Dot and like Richie Rich and Archie, read newspaper comics. I'd, bug my mom to give me 25 cents. I'd go buy a comic at, the store. So I was always into comics. But then in 1973, I went to Japan. And I was in third grade, and that time, Japanese, the yen to the dollar ratio was 360 yen to $1. I didn't realize how good I had it till now. Nowadays, if you're lucky, it's like maybe 100 yen to $1. So that's just to kind of let you know, for a third grader who basically, it was like being let loose in a candy store. It was just so delightful. Plastic food and, like, oh my goodness, there's, all kinds of candy and all kinds of things to see. I was just enamored of the whole thing. Even though I couldn't speak any Japanese, I went with my parents. My father's family is originally from Hiroshima-ken, Yamaguchi-ken, and I have aunts who live in Miyajima, which is a pretty island off of Hiroshima. I remember having my first momiji manju, and my aunt took me to a bookstore when I was there, and then my problems began. It was like, like how heroin addicts remember their first hit? It was kind of like that. It's like, oh, the best stuff ever. I actually went back to Miyajima recently to pay homage to that bookstore, because that's where it really did all begin. Now, here's an interesting thing about, me and manga. When I first encountered it, I couldn't read it at all. But what attracted me to it was that I could still understand the stories, even without reading the words. The storytelling was just that clear and compelling. I mean, this is a series called Candy Candy, which is about an orphan girl and then the troubles and tribulations she goes through. And it was like crack. It was just romantic and dramatic, and you just couldn't wait to see the next chapter. There was an anime that played on Kiku TV. So I was actually pretty lucky in the sense that growing up in Hawaii, I was, having access to Japanese culture was very easy. I mean, I'm Japanese American, but I'm third generation. So my parents really didn't speak much Japanese. My grandparents on my father's side didn't speak much Japanese around the house either. We watched Japanese TV, but we relied on the subtitles. But it was kind of neat because I could come back from Japan and I could indulge my brand new fascination in it by going to the Japanese movie theaters. There was the Nippon Theater and there was a Toyo Theater. There were Japanese bookstores that were actually quite large. Hakubundo and Bunbundo were quite big at the time, and I started a subscription. I would get these Japanese magazines every month. The one thing I'm really grateful for being introduced to manga at that time is that shoujo manga was for girls, and it was unapologetically for girls. It also, a lot of times what they would do in these magazines, they'd have profiles of manga artists, and they'd show you how to draw your own comics. And it was all very simple and straightforward. And it was always really encouraging me, to draw comics. And I didn't realize what a gift that was until quite a few years later. I went to my first San Diego Comic-Con when I was 1992, and I discovered I was a minority. That most of the guys there were guys. And, the female comic artists that, there were very few. And most of them felt quite, I guess repressed. I don't know how else to put it. They felt, like they were the odd man out. It was like it was special to be a female comics artist. So I was very fortunate to grow up in a situation where loving comics and wanting to draw comics and dreaming of becoming a professional manga artist was never a dream that seemed out of reach. Then in 1983, I discovered this book, and this is called Manga by Fred Schott. This was the first time that I read a book in English that explained to me what manga was. Who the legends of the genre were, what place it had in Japanese society, what kind of stories there were, and what they were called, and who to really pay attention to. I mean, before that time, this information was not available in English at all. I mean, this is way before the internet. This is way before you could find manga in every comic book store. There really wasn't any manga in comic book stores. The only manga you would read would maybe be Barefoot Gen, which we could find at the local revolutionary bookstores because it was about the bombing of Hiroshima, or maybe if you saw Lone Wolf and Cub. I used to joke at that time I could go to any comic book store and buy all the manga there and still have money left in my pocket. Manga changed everything for me. It taught me the world that I was so fascinated by. Fred Schott, the guy who wrote this book, he's a really fascinating guy. He spent some time in Japan, and he went to school there. And at some point in the 70s, he became a translator, and he worked a lot with Osamu Tezuka, who is basically like the god of Japanese manga. He's the guy that everyone is influenced by, like how American people are influenced by Walt Disney. Japanese mangaka always say Osamu Tezuka. He was an amazingly prolific artist throughout his entire life. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about him, Fred also recently translated the graphic novel biography of Tezuka. It's pretty thick. It's like this thick. It's like 3 inches thick. And it's incredibly engaging. That guy was a workaholic. What was interesting, too, in Manga offered excerpts of different manga stories, including Barefoot Gen, Rose of Versailles, and Phoenix by Tezuka. For a long time, these little excerpts that was all you could read of these stories. Only very recently, some of these are available in English in its entirety. Barefoot Gen is available from Last Gasp. Rose of Versailles is coming out next year in first English edition. And Phoenix is available from Viz. Phoenix is considered Tezuka's masterwork. It's about reincarnation, and it spans so many eras, from like prehistoric times to sci-fi and space. It's an epic story. It looks very cute, but it's a very deep story. So if you ever have a chance, please check it out. So people ask me, why do you love manga so much? Well, there's maybe 4 reasons. One thing I like about manga compared to U.S. comics is that it has a huge variety of stories. I mean, everyone says, well, manga's not any one thing. When people say comic books in America, they go, oh, yeah, superhero stuff. Manga in Japan can be about anything and everything. It can be like sci-fi. It can be like cute stories about cats. It can be horror. It can be like Silent Voice is a really wonderful story about a deaf girl and the boy who torments her. And it was written in collaboration with the Japanese Association of the Deaf. So it teaches empathy for people who are deaf in Japan, as well as being an incredibly touching and wonderful story. There really is something for everyone. I mean, you can have a cradle-to-grave relationship with manga. There's a manga that's not available in English called, I think, Shooting Stars in Twilight. And it's like love stories about seniors, people in their 60s and 70s and 80s falling in love again. And I don't think I see that very often in America. What's nice about manga is that it assumes that manga's for everybody, not just teenagers. Another thing I like about manga is manga's very female-friendly. Like I mentioned earlier, my love of manga come because it was stories that spoke to me, that I could enjoy reading. Whether it's magical girl stuff that made me feel like as a girl, wow, I can do this. It's like, oh, are those girls just like me? Or the other one over there, the blue cover, Otherworld Barbaras by Moto Hagio. She writes incredible sci-fi stories. It's kind of like Inception. If you go check it out, it's a real mind bender. In Clothes Called Fat by Moyoka Ano, she was a guest at the Academy earlier. This is a story about bulimia. And A Bride Story by Kaoru Mori. It's about a woman at turn of a century, I think it's Turkey. But it's beautifully drawn. These are books that I can unreservedly recommend to anybody, adult or children. The other neat thing I liked about manga, the more I got to know about the American comic book system, the more I liked manga. Just because manga is creator driven. Whereas a lot of the comics in America is IP driven or intellectual property driven or character driven. Like the guy who created Batman many years ago, and there have been hundreds of people who've drawn Batman since and reinterpreted him and changed him, and characters live and die, and it just kind of can turn on a dime. Whereas most manga series are created from the first volume to the last volume by the same creator, with the same vision, the same story. One thing that really I really didn't like about American comics at a certain point was that you could read X-Men and be really into it, and then all of a sudden it would change writer and it would change artist, and it was like a completely different series. Or a character you like all of a sudden became someone completely different. And I didn't like that, it just kind of threw me off. Whereas I think manga, there is a beginning and an end. And you can pick it up, and you don't have to pick up all these different variants and subplots, and it's very cohesive. The other neat thing, too, is that manga artists, when they are very successful, are very successful. They make a lot of money. I mean, most manga artists, don't make a heck of a lot of money, But the ones that do, like Rumiko Takahashi and Eiichiro Oda, who does One Piece, they're considered some of the richest people in Japan. Now, some part of me, thinks that it's kind of, that's how it should be. That the creators should be making, the creators of the characters you love so much should be making good money. I'll get a little bit into that a little later. The other nice thing I like about manga is manga teaches me stuff. It gives me a window into another world. There's manga about almost everything. Drops of God is about wine. Haikyuu is about volleyball. Onward Towards Our Noble Death is basically about a doomed battalion in World War II stuck in Southeast Asia and the South Pacific. Ooku by Fumio Shinaga is a story that imagines what would it be like if 75% of the men in feudal Japan died from a disease and all the rulers were women. So these are very interesting, and reading seeing things from a Japanese point of view, seeing how World War II from a Japanese soldier's point of view, these are all very interesting. I actually don't really care much for sports, but I'm addicted to sports manga. In fact, I was watching the Olympics, the volleyball, and I was kind of sad that they weren't yelling, "Nice return, nice receive, don't mind," like they do in Haikyuu. I don't know, it's a little disorienting. So meanwhile, all through my, even after, my teens, and I was still reading and buying comics. All kinds of comics. I wasn't just buying manga, of course. I read, X-Men, Love and Rockets, Akira, everything. I was pretty much an omnivore. In fact, whenever I come home, there are still 8 or 9 long boxes of comics that my mom says, "Aren't you going to get rid of those things?" No! And, during my 20s, I also moved to the mainland for a little bit. I spent some time at School of Visual Arts, California College of the Arts in San Francisco. Now, what this did for me was really neat, because I spent most of my life in Hawaii. But by leaving Hawaii, I came home and saw Hawaii with new eyes. And that's when I started drawing my own comics. I had drawn comics, before, like I had drawn for the high school newspaper and stuff like that. But after coming back from the mainland, all of a sudden I could see how special Hawaii was and how differently we saw the world, and how, things were all of a sudden funny that I didn't think were funny before. It kind of reminded me of the things I took for granted. It also, being on the mainland made me brave. It wasn't like something about Hawaii. Sometimes you feel, make A, I can't, stand out, or, if I do this, then everyone will laugh at me. Going on the mainland changed my attitude. It's like, all of a sudden I felt like I came back and saw huge opportunities, things that I could do, and there was no time like today to do it. So one day I just kind of started drawing sample strips. I marched over to Kaleo and I said, "Can I do this?" And they said yes. And that's how I started drawing comic strips on a regular basis. It was interesting and a little scary, because of course, you're not showing just comics to your friends anymore. You're not showing it to your mom and who says everything's great. You're not showing it to your friends who say, "Oh, that's great, that's funny." You're showing it to this whole world who sometimes can say, "You know what? Last week's one sucked," or "I didn't get that." And you just kind of buck up and you learn from that, and you grow. By putting my stuff out there, I just learned and grew. Even though basically Kaleo paid the equivalent of like a Snickers bar for each strip. So I kept doing comics. I drew comics for different alternative weekly newspapers. This was a cover for Honolulu Weekly for the Big Melee. And then one day I got a call from the advertiser saying, "Hey, you want to draw comics for us?" And I started doing that. This is a comic strip about my mom. I live in San Francisco now, and anytime there's an earthquake in California, she always calls me. "Are you okay?" "Mom, that was in San Bernardino." "Where's that?" "Very far away from here." And it's like she can't comprehend this, to me, my mom, far away is Mililani. Being in a car longer than half an hour is so far away. So it's really hard to explain to her that, LA is a 6-hour drive away. Anyway, that's Hawaii. So I, kept doing this. And then, and in the course of, doing these comic strips, I also started writing more. I started doing newspaper, I did nightclub column, I did concert reviews, I did art reviews. And the reason why I don't have any of them up here is this is all before the internet. So a lot of my work really only exists as yellowed newspaper clippings in my filing cabinet somewhere. On the other hand, a lot of the more strange things I did in my 20s, like performance art, no YouTube then. My reputation is safe. All throughout, my time in Hawaii, I got involved with arts a lot. Honolulu printmakers. I spent a lot of time at Linakona School. I was a press room monitor. Printmaking was my major in college. I was also part of the Pacific Handcrafters Guild. I worked at Nohea Gallery. I did some work with the state DOE. It was kind of part of being an artist in Hawaii. I mean, at the time, people told me, if you want to make a living as an artist in Hawaii, you either got to be a graphic designer, you got to be an art teacher, or you got to paint pretty flowers. Or find a rich husband. I don't know. But life had other plans. I got a job at LavaNet, and I remember these things. That's a 56K modem. That's the thing where you used to, if you were connected to the internet, you would call, it would doot, 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 and then you're on the internet. And then if your brother picked up the phone in the other room, you got cut off. Anyway, I know this well. And you might ask yourself, how did you go from being in art to working in technology? And my answer is punk rock. My friends who started LavaNet were my friends from my punk rock days. Go figure. Since then, the last 20 years, I've been working in technology companies. I've worked at Microsoft in Redmond, worked at CitySearch in LA, worked at Citrix in Santa Clara, or eBay. I'm now currently doing contract work with Sony in San Francisco. So, but the funny thing is, like, all while I was doing that, most of my technology jobs, most of my colleagues, as far as they knew, I was a writer. I was the person who wrote error messages. I was the one who argued about whether the button should say pay now or go to, check out. Those kinds of things. But then when I was working at eBay, something interesting happened. I started drawing again. And it was interesting because what I would end up doing is I'd be collaborating with, product managers and coders and people working in the business. And then we were all trying to solve problems. We were all trying to understand who our customers were. We were all trying to understand like what step, how to make a complex product work. And I would just start grabbing the whiteboard marker, going up to the board and say, "Do you mean this? Da da da, or this? Da da da, or that?" And I would do it with pictures, or doing a combination of pictures and words. And this was strangely extremely effective. So nowadays, what I do is kind of a combination of that. I do storyboards. This is a storyboard for a new web app called Cube Free from Citrix. It was an app designed to help you find places to work outside of the office, like at cafes or at co-working spaces. I would help them create these storyboards, and then we would present them to the executives, and we would get money just by explaining how the process worked. I drew customer journey maps. This is for eBay. This is everything in the red boxes are what the seller goes through. Everything in the blue boxes is what the buyer goes through. This is for a reusable box where the post office sends the seller a box and they can ship the item, and then when the buyer receives it, they can either give it back to the post office or they can use it to sell something else on eBay. I've also worked with our user researchers and helping our product managers feel empathy for customers who aren't like them. For example, this was for a product called Zen Mobile, which is a secure enterprise app for like government or like banks and stuff like that. So we did a research project where we went to follow the San Diego Sheriff's Department around and watching them use our mobile apps. And this was a story about this guy. He's got a call from his partner. He has to go rush out and help him out. And then he opens up the app, and because it's a secure app, he has to type in a password of 10 uppercase numbers and letters. Meanwhile, he's got one hand on the steering wheel, one hand on the gas, and he's going, "Fuck this shit." Sorry. And anyway, so what was interesting about these stories is that when I've talked with the developers afterwards, it's, "Oh my God, this helped me realize and remember that I'm creating a product for people who aren't like us, who aren't sitting in chairs, and just get up, get a cup of coffee. They're actually out there in the world doing things, and what we do affects them, and sometimes affects them in a bad way." So basically, just as me using comic storytelling to, I guess, have people see things differently. There's another thing I did at Citrix. We would do customer interviews, and then I would draw out what people were saying. So, for example, this was for an Indian IT consulting company, and they were telling us how much we sucked, how much we drove them nuts. That we didn't take into account that they use these Chinese phones that aren't really popular in India, but we don't support that, or that the bandwidth in India is really bad. So when we have like programs that demand a lot of high bandwidth, they're just left there standing there staring at their phones, and we didn't understand that. This was about an hour-long conversation, and I have 6 more pages of this. 6 more pages of them yelling at us. Now, what's interesting about why do I draw it in pictures? For this reason. Before, these types of reports would just be done in Word documents. Before, these types of reports are 40%, if you're lucky. These, 100%. And I would get calls from people saying, you drew this thing where this customer said there was 50 features that we didn't do. Then what were those 50 features? And it's like, I don't know. Why don't you ask them? But it was interesting because I noticed that by telling these stories, I was getting people from all levels of the company to care about customers that they didn't care about before, to care about problems that they didn't care about before. And that's what storytelling does. So I also do things like this is at a workshop in DirecTV, AT&T, and it was a workshop on trying to understand who their customers are and what they go through. I also do what's called scribing. I go to different company events and I do live drawing of what people are saying on the stage. This is very challenging, I'll have you know, because you're basically having to listen, interpret, and draw very quickly. It's a great practice, by the way. I do this sometimes when I'm listening to boring lectures because it forces me to pay attention. It was when I first heard about this type of work, I was really responded to it because this is the kind of notes I was taking at UH at my art history classes. I would draw pictures, and it would help me remember the paintings, and it would help me remember different ideas much more than if I just wrote it. So I highly recommend it. I also do a lot of work with startups, and I help them tell their stories so that they get funding. In some cases, I tell their stories, and then they don't get funding. But you know what? That's okay, because all they lost was just the time of me drawing something. It saved them time from developing something that nobody needed. So I consider that a win. Over the past 2 years or so, I've been traveling around. I've gone to Japan, I've gone to Hyderabad, various parts of the U.S., and I teach simple drawing for user experience design. It's weird, when you grow up drawing all your life, and you grow up around art, hang out around artists, you don't and you're told over and over again, starving artist, you never make a living from this. You're like, oh, well, you only take like $5 for this drawing. Well, it took you only 2 minutes to make, didn't it? So you kind of get surrounded by this belief that drawing and art is not worth very much. But what I've learned over the last couple of years is that being an artist is a very, very valuable skill. Being a storyteller is a very valuable skill. We have talents and we have abilities that people really need. And I'm really pleased to try to teach others how to do what I do. Meanwhile, manga's still a big part of my life. Thanks to a coworker at MSN, I got turned on to about.com. They said, hey, find a topic and maybe you can write about it. And voila, manga popped up. So I wrote some sample articles, and I, based on what I knew from MSN on how to do search engine optimization and how to write good headlines and things like that, I applied to be the editor, and I got it. And this opened a whole, much like how in 1983 going to Japan opened a door for me, this opened a whole nother door for me. Since then, I've been kind of, besides doing my technology work, this is what I call my super fun side job, my super fun tax-deductible side job. I travel around the world, and I write about manga. I get to interview a lot of manga artists and editors, get to ask lots of nosy questions. Last year I interviewed Masashi Kishimoto, who is the creator of Naruto. And this summer I was talking with Tsutomu Nihei, who is the creator of Knights of Sidonia. I regularly do panels at San Diego Comic-Con about manga. So, usually if I'm not traveling for business, I'm traveling for comics. And it's kind of a fun life. It'd be nice if the manga side of my life paid all the bills. But it's kind of nice that it doesn't, because by having my life, my profession being something else, I can be neutral. I'm not working for any one manga publisher, and I can say I love everything, and so I try to cover everything I can. So I guess if you had to explain it, my life is kind of about intersections. Between technology and writing is content strategy, and that's the UI writing and the stuff I did at eBay and Microsoft. Between graphic design and comics and writing, that's where I'm a comics journalist. And between technology and graphic design, that's where I do my UX work. So it's kind of neat. So what did I learn on my journey so far? Well, here's 5 things I can share. 1, try saying yes to stuff that make you scared. It might take you someplace interesting. I know it's taken me lots of interesting places. 2, you got to have friends. Most of my best opportunities, most of the most amazing turns that have happened in my life came because of people. People were my friends, some from UH, some from Temari, some from my past jobs. It's all been about my friends. I also got to say, as a little adjunct to this, I am very, very fortunate to have very strange Japanese parents who let me do whatever I wanted. They never pressured me to get a real job. They never pressured me to get a job that made lots of money. They always believed that they always liked that I like art, and always encouraged me to do so. The third thing is put yourself out there as much as possible. Get your work seen and read as much as possible. A lot of what, being an Asian American chick from Hawaii, you just kind of, the overall culture is, don't stand out. Don't make people uncomfortable. And thanks to going to the mainland, that doesn't matter as much anymore. Every time that I put myself out there, and yeah, sure, I failed a lot too, but every failure taught me something. And every time I put myself out there, somebody could see what I was doing and say, hey, this thing came up. Let's call Deb. Also, the other thing I wanted to point out is that, if you're kind of struggling, you're the type of artist like trying to figure out where am I going to go, what am I going to do. I'm just here to kind of say that maybe your dream job hasn't been invented yet. My dream job, I couldn't tell you what it was. I mean, when I was growing up, I thought I wanted to be a children's book illustrator. And then I wanted to be a comic book artist. And now I call myself a user experience designer. And there are college programs to learn how to do that, and vast books and whole conferences on how to do this. But when I first started doing it, there was no such word. You could get into it just by being a good writer, being a good designer, just adapting. And as Dory says, just keep swimming. Anyway, if you're interested in some of this stuff, I'm on Flickr, I'm on SlideShare, I have more of my examples of my stuff out there. I'm also in a couple of books, See What I Mean, and Mapping Experiences. Some of my work is in there as well. If you're interested in scribing, there's it's also called Graphic Facilitation. I highly recommend it. Drawing on the Back of the Napkin is a great book on just learning how to draw and tell stories for business. There are also online classes. The Grove teaches graphic facilitation. That's in San Francisco, and I took classes from them as well. And that's kind of it. I really didn't know exactly what you guys wanted to hear, so I just kind of tried to wrap it up as best I could. But I am happy to take any questions. Fire away. I guess, the more, I think throughout my interest in manga, before I started working for About.com, my interest in manga was pretty much, doing casual research, reading, manga, and I would only buy the stuff that I liked, the stuff that I was personally interested in. By writing for About.com, I had to go deeper. I had to start learning about different types of manga that I normally wasn't buying or wasn't looking into. One such genre is boys' love. I had never heard of it before I started working at About.com. And it was just opening up this whole world of that I didn't understand before. Boys Love, I'll explain what Boys Love is. Boys Love comics are comics about boys or men in love with each other that are written by women, largely for women. So I had never heard of such a thing. I mean, I was around fandom and stuff like that, but I'd never heard of such a thing. And then later on, I heard about Gengoro Tagame's work and gay manga, and this was gay manga. This was manga about gay men, by and for gay men, and these two types of manga look completely different. I mean, some of them look similar, but you know, it was an interesting introduction to, I guess, different ways to look at sexuality that I had never seen before. Different ways of looking at how people relate to each other that I'd never seen before. I also started seeing more like Heta Uma manga. Heta Uma is kind of like so bad it's good, or like purposely inept manga that has a lot, that people like because it has a lot of energy and it's very visceral. So I discovered that manga has so many different faces and expressions. You know that saying you like manga and you expect it to be a certain one thing. That's like saying I like movies. What kind of movies do you like? Because movies can be about anything, and so can manga. Manga is I would say it's, I mean, anyone out there, if you want to correct me if I'm wrong, but manga is just a general word for like playful pictures. It's basically just comics. In fact, a lot of comics in Japan don't call themselves manga, they call themselves komiku. Go figure. So, you know, it's interesting because what comes to America as manga, initially the first batch of stuff that came to America was stuff that people figured would sell to the comic shop crowd, which means it was more seinen manga or men's manga, sci-fi, Ghost in the Shell, Lone Wolf and Cub, stuff like that. So there was or Akira. So there was this perception that manga was this gritty, visceral, action-packed stuff. But, you know, that was only the teeny tiniest slice of what manga is, or what Japanese comics are. There's this whole vast array. And then I think in the 90s, then they started publishing shoujo manga. Then people started thinking, and shonen manga, so a lot of people think, oh, well, manga is only this ninjas and magical girls and stuff like that. And no, I say that's still a teeny tiny slice of what's out there. So when people say, you know, what's a manga style? There is no real. I mean, there's certain things that are universal. I mean, yeah, it's all red, right to left. There are certain visual conventions that are very unique to manga, like how they show anger and how they use sound effects and how motion is shown. There are some things that are very unique to Japanese comic styles. But, you know, like, let me see if I can pull it up. Like the thing with manga is that, you know, there's just so many different styles. And it continually evolves. The manga that was created in the 70s looks really different than the manga that's created today. In fact, one thing I should point out, I've spoken to a couple of manga editors in Japan, and we've talked about Americans who want to become manga artists in Japan. And I've recommended them a couple of people. Say, hey, you know, this guy does great work. This guy does great work. You know, looks like might do well in Japan. And they say, it looks old. And I go, what? And I go, yeah, you know, why do all you Americans draw in such an old style? And so they would ask me really blunt questions. Like they'd say, don't these artists read what's current in Japan? And it's like, yes. Kinda, sorta, maybe. One problem with that is like a lot of the how to draw manga books teach you how to draw in a style of manga from the 1990s or the 1980s, and then and so to a Japanese eye, it looks like you drew it it's really old style. So I really struggle with that when people say, what's manga? What's a manga style? Because manga confounds that expectation all the time. Well, that's an interesting question, because when I first started doing this, to get yourself seen as a comic book artist, you had to go to comic book shows and you had to get books printed and you had to schlep them and sell them. And since then, a lot of people, the internet's happened, and now you can make yourself known and get work by having a Tumblr blog or by communicating with people on social media. Now, on one hand, I think you can have a career here and work here and make this your base. But I have to say that a lot of what I was able to do came because I had face-to-face interaction with a lot of these people. And I was I'm at all the shows, and I see them over and over again, and it helped me build my network. I think it's important to do work that speaks to Hawaii, because I think Hawaii is very much a leading edge type of place because of its multiculturalism. The kind of multiculturalism that we have in Hawaii, I think the rest of the world would really envy. But at the same time, too, I think there's a lot of issues in Hawaii that need to be spoken about, and artists can do that very, very well. But for myself, I think I would not be able to do half the things I've been able to do if I stayed here. And I think I don't think it's wrong for people to stay here, and I don't think it's better to go to the mainland, but for me, it really opened my eyes a lot. I think it is possible to have a career in Hawaii and do it everything from here, but I think you have to also invest in spending time on the mainland to network and get yourself seen. I think that's really, no matter how much the internet can do for you, I think that's still very important. I think what's interesting about manga is that a lot of it, I'd say more than half of it, is artists written and drawn. Whereas in the American style is very much, they've basically parceled it out. There's a writer, there's an art, there's a penciler, there's an inker, there's a letterer, there's a colorist, Whereas, and that's mostly for expedience sake. There's many writers who can write 5 or 6 different comic series and work with 5 or 6 different artists. The way that in Japan, however, I think, and again, this is something I really liked about it here, is that as an artist myself, as someone who loves to draw, I love seeing the hand of one creator. I love seeing their sensibilities, Like Vagabond there is by Takehiko Inoue, and it's a really amazing story about Miyamoto Musashi as a young man, and how he just goes from being this wild, rebellious person into going through this kind of spiritual awakening. And it's a beautifully drawn story, and it's a beautifully told story. And I think it's possible to do. In some cases, I've met manga artists like Takeshi Obata, who did Death Note. He's the artist, and he says, I can't write to save my life. I can't write a good story. So he collaborates with other writers. I like that there's both. Speaking as an artist and an artist who is a storyteller, I really like that option to do both. Yeah, if I can explain, someone explained this to me a while ago, but the movie industry in Japan is not as well funded as the movie industry in America is. And so if you see like a movie made, there's a lot of movies made from manga. in Japan. Manga is kind of like the de facto IP generator in Japan. And there's all kinds of movies made from manga that don't look anything like manga. I mean, they're like thoughtful love stories, high school love stories, or they're like the other story, let's see, which one? Silent Voice is also recently made. I think it's been made into a live-action film, made into a live-action and an animated film. I think maybe the difference here is in America, comics equals superheroes. Comics equals action, you know? Even though there are, you know, movies made in America based on comics that look nothing like that. I'm trying to think which one it is. Crumb. There's several, but mostly indie stories. You know, I don't know. I mean, one thing I find really fascinating about comparing American comics and Japanese comics is their idea of who the hero is, what the role of a hero is, and what they should be doing. You know, in American comic books, it's like the hero is this guy who's going to save it all. You know, like it's individual power and individual effort. And in Japan, it seems to be more about group effort. And sometimes, like, the most successful superhero comics in Japan are basically making fun of American superhero concepts. Like, there's one called One Punch Man. And One Punch Man is basically about a guy who's so strong, he can knock out all his enemies with one punch. Boom. You know, the fight's over. And as a result, he's extremely bored. So, and it becomes this whole, like, this super funny story about, like, this guy who's just doing his job and he's not getting any credit for it and he's just kind of bored. And then meanwhile, all these other bombastic heroes say, I'm going to beat you, I'm going to do this, or I'm the super best and whatever. And he's like, yeah, whatever. Check it out, by the way, super funny. One Punch Man, I think, is on Hulu. Did that help? I kind of meandered a little bit. Anyway, like I said, thank you for coming out today. And as your little bonus gift, you get a copy of my books.